So yes, the avoidable suffering is characterized by the 7 dark arrows. So when we're suffering in some way, there's likely to be one of the 7 dark arrows sticking in us. This sets us up for future suffering for us, others, or both. The act of pulling out an arrow requires will, which can feel unfamiliar. So what the Native Americans are saying, that it's not just by observing that these patterns and arrows reside within us, we need to actively pull them out for us to be able to be a different way in the world and to loosen the hold that some of these patterns have on us. So the 21 arrows are, we've got 7 dark arrows, 7 light arrows, and 7 rainbow arrows. So the workshop today will be really focused around the 7 dark arrows, but we'll also be bringing in some of the 7 light arrows, because the idea is that once we release a dark arrow, it makes room for a light arrow to come in. But we might need to consciously pick up one of the light arrows to support us in working with our dark arrows. So for example, the moment that you come into this workshop and engage in this learning, you're picking up that light arrow of self-awareness. So self-awareness is really key, and it's a crucial part of the process of working through all of our patterns. We can slowly start to pick up the other light arrows of self-appreciation, self-acceptance as we work through the dark arrows, which then enable us to pick up the arrows of self-pleasure, so we can enjoy life and enjoy ourselves in life, self-love, self-actualization, and self-impeccability, which is about really being committed to the self and taking responsibility for the self. When we've got the 7 dark arrows of attachment, dependency, judgments, comparisons, expectations, needy child syndrome, and self-importance, when these arrows are in us, it's actually really hard to access the 7 light arrows, so they can feel quite far out of reach. So the idea is that as we work through the 7 dark arrows, the 7 lighter arrows are easier to pick up, but again, we need to actively pick them up. And the 7 rainbow arrows is what happens as a result of releasing the 7 dark arrows, picking up the 7 light arrows, and then this is what happens as a result. So for example, what we tend to do is to try and go straight to the rainbow arrows. We try and go straight to maybe being wise and wisdom, or having heart-to-heart communications, and then wondering why that doesn't always work out for us. Or abundance and prosperity. We might see people really hankering after prosperity and abundance, only to gain material wealth, but to feel really, really empty within themselves. And that's because there's still 7 dark arrows sticking in, or some of the dark arrows sticking in. So just to recap that, by working through the 7 dark arrows and pulling those out, actively picking up the 7 light arrows, the 7 rainbow arrows will start to take care of themselves. And you might even be able to now reflect on times from the past where you've worked through a situation and you've become wiser as a result, or you've gained more trust in yourself or others, or it's enabled you to be a bit more open with other people in relationships. So we can really draw on those experiences of that, and maybe reflecting back on what was that process that you went through. What did you learn about yourself? What did you let go of within yourself? All those changes that happened that enabled these 7 rainbow arrows to be a bit more present in your life. So this teaching isn't coming from the basis that these are all absent now, that, you know, we'll be experiencing these in different levels. All of us will have different experiences of these. But this is about just bringing more of the rainbow arrows into our life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the 7 dark arrows. Before I do this, if you just open up the chat, and I will pop in the slides just so you've got those here, because you might need these for a bit later on. So hopefully if you open up the chat, you can see that PDF that's just gone in there. If you can't do that, you might want to take a photograph of each of these slides. So when you go into breakout rooms, you've got them just to refresh your memory. You don't necessarily need it, but just to refresh your memory. So the 7 dark arrows, we'll go through all 7 of them, and then I'll pop you into breakout rooms just to start thinking about them and how they relate to yourself. And then we'll go through some practices of how to release yourself from some of these dark arrows. So the first dark arrow is the arrow of attachment. So this is possibly the most poisonous of arrows and the least obvious arrow. And it links into all the other dark arrows. So the arrow of attachment is when we have become attached to suffering itself. Whilst it's a painful place to be, it's familiar. Perhaps a pull towards, say, a victim position, or maybe there's a pull towards a certain kind of level of drama in our life, or a pull towards anxiety and being in a kind of anxious place. We might, really, really see things to worry about, for example. So according to this learning is that we unconsciously set up situations which reproduce the types of suffering that are familiar to us. So there's an unconscious level of process at play here that sets up situations that keeps that suffering going. So for example, we might unconsciously attract relationships that are quite avoidant, maybe people in our life that are quite avoidant, and so we feel rejected over and over again. Or we might find ourselves in situations where we view organisations or other people as more powerful than us, so we feel the victim quite a lot. And as I said, while it's a painful place to be, it's familiar, perhaps a pull towards, or like I said, the pull towards the victim position. So we prefer known pain to the anticipated pain of entering the unknown. This is quite an interesting thought, that as humans, we prefer the devil we know to the devil we don't. So we prefer that the known pain to the anticipated pain of entering the unknown and letting go of the current pain. And it's almost like if I can just feel the pain now, then I won't be further hurt down the track. If I can feel it now, I won't be disappointed or let down. So each of these dark arrows has a contrary manifestation. So this is like its polar opposite. So this theory does work on opposites. It works on equal and opposite energies. So what might happen is, rather than that being in conscious awareness that we are attached to suffering in some way, we might develop what we call an ungrounded detachment or a compulsive drive in the unknown. So this might be somebody that just lets go of things and lets go and just puts themselves into really unfamiliar positions, maybe walks away from relationships really, really easily, or maybe walks away from jobs really easily and just keeps up lots of changes going on in their life. So almost like this compulsive dive into the unknown, rather than a real fear and resistance of diving into the unknown, which can keep the suffering up. So in a way, in the contrary manifestation, there's still suffering that happens. It's almost like we're running away from that suffering rather than it playing out in that looping pattern. So it's still there driving. So let's just, for this first arrow, open up the chat. So hover your mouse at the top of your screen so you can find the toolbar. Open up the chat, and does this first dark arrow resonate in any way to any of you? We've got some yeses, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so in relational patterns. Yeah. Great. So it is really a downward spiral. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And Freud would call this attachment to suffering the repetition compulsion, where we repeat patterns with the thought that we repeat them with the hope that we'll heal them in some way. Next time it will be healed. It can play out in all areas of life. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this can be a really useful one to really pose the question, am I choosing this? Or what am I choosing in this situation? You know, to keep this going, I'm saying yes to this suffering in some way. And when we can fully acknowledge that we're saying yes to the suffering, that instantly starts to lose our grip on it. It's when we are more blind to it or refuse to see that we might have anything to do with it. You know, why would I choose to be in a relationship where it just ends in being rejected? You know, consciously that seems ludicrous, but unconsciously there might be a lot of sense into why that's happening. So the second dark arrow is around dependencies. So this is dependency on a substance, person, or activity, which carries the belief that our survival depends on this thing that we believe we cannot do without. Can include dependencies on praise, approval, fame, money, partnership, work, drugs, alcohol, food. So dependencies isn't just around substance misuse. So that's that more overt end of the spectrum that's seen and overt. We can form dependencies on all sorts of things, you know, other people, like I said, praise, approval, fame. Maybe you can open up the chat and help out with what other things we might develop dependencies on. Yeah, so praise equals reward. Yeah, so releases those endorphins. So keep that going. Chaos, religion. Yes, yeah. Exercise. Yeah. Others. Yeah. Music. Hmm. And the key is here is that first bullet point. So dependency on a substance, personal activity, which carries the belief that our survival depends on this thing that we believe we can't do without. We are escaping underlying feelings that we believe are unendurable. So this dependency helps us to cope with these unendurable underlying feelings that we just think we won't be able to cope with or bear. The cycle of addiction keeps us preoccupied, helping to avoid underlying feelings. So there's that preoccupation that comes with it. So we then just stop looking further down. So the contrary manifestation here, so the polar opposite to this, that's still part of the same cycle, is complete independence, so also known as pseudo-autonomy. So it might be absolute abstination from all of life's pleasures, so abstaining from alcohol, abstaining from sex, abstaining from intimate relationships, abstaining from all, you know, sugary foods, all sorts of things, but it's taken it to the real extreme where there's a squeezing out of enjoyment in life. The judgments is the third dark arrow. We can start to see how these are interlinked, because when there's a dependency, there's also an internal judge on that dependency. And we might also find ourselves judging other people's dependencies as well. So these all start to be really interlinked. So this is when we judge others and ourselves. But when we judge, there's always three fingers pointing back. It is different from discernment or appraisal. So it's different from that sort of that judging eye when we're discerning, you know, is this right or wrong for me? Is this a good decision or not a good decision? Should I trust that person or not? You know, it's different from that wise discernment of just us navigating our way through life and having to make choices all the time based on some kind of judgment. Yeah, this is different. Judgments intend to undermine the other, whether we're explicit about it or not. There's an undermining that happens when we judge, because we're sort of looking down on that person, which makes us feel a bit more powerful. So the contrary manifestation, so the polar opposite, is attempting not to discern or judge at all. So seeing the good in everyone, being overly trusting, which could leave us open to abuse and disappointment. So we sometimes see this in the helping profession or the caring profession. And I certainly see this when I'm training counsellors as well, is that there can be just that real pull towards just seeing the good in everyone, really understanding. It's different from in being empathic and compassionate and understanding that there might be trauma behind somebody's behaviour. It's different behind that. It's not being able to kind of hold both aspects of the polarity, both good and bad. It's not being able to hold that actually that behaviour is just not okay with the understanding. It's just all about the understanding, which might then really open that person up to be abused and walked over.
Okay, can I ask a question at that point?
Yes, of course.
What's meant by there's always three fingers pointing back?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't really describe that very well, did I? When we're pointing the finger at somebody and judging, there's always three fingers pointing back, which really means what we're judging in others is usually within ourselves in some way. So we're usually holding a bit of see something in somebody else that we don't like. It's often reflecting something in ourselves that we don't like about ourselves. And it's easier to see it in someone else and judge it than it is to own it ourselves. And if we go back to the dependencies, we can see this in dependency. So it might be really easy, for example, to judge somebody that's got quite a big overt addiction to something. We might either pity them or we judge or have some kind of opinion. But actually what we're doing then is we are not looking at ourselves, and we're not looking at where we might be dependent in some way, or where we might have that quality within us also. I hope that answers okay.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like if you live in a glass house, don't throw stones, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I just really, really like that, because I think, judgments are such a, and again, we can really hold all these arrows in compassion, because it's part of our humanness in a way. We learn to judge. We sort of learn it from our parents, we learn it from teachers, we learn it from all around us. So, we learn to do that. And what we can do is, when we start to just really acknowledge that, yeah, there are three fingers pointing back and it's something within ourselves that we're probably not liking, it just helps us to understand ourselves, but also to gain more understanding of the other person as well. So the fourth arrow is comparisons. Compare and despair. So when we're comparing ourselves to other people, we're despairing at the same time. It's not a very nice place to be. It's that real one-up, one-downmanship. We just see the other person as just better than us, having more than us in some way, and that we feel impoverished in that moment. It's a little bit the opposite to that. Judgment is a one down, peering down on the other. This is looking up, like, oh, I wish I could be more like that. And it might be to do with material things, with qualities, with skills, with talents. This isn't about comparing in a healthy, good way, where if I see somebody that's got a quality that I really want to develop, I can really aspire to be a bit more like that. And that opens up space for growth. That enables me to go, oh, okay, what can I do to be a bit more like that, or to have that myself? When we're in that one up, we just see that person as having and us as having less than and being impoverished. We stay very stuck in that pattern of being. So we usually are comparing ourselves unfavorably when we compare, but we might also be in that one-up position and comparing in more of a judgmental way as well, but it's usually unfavorably. Poison of this arrow lies in the caustic, so corrosive part of it, and it's different from assessing realistically. So that example that I gave of, I might see somebody that has a skill that I'd really love to have, and if I can just hold that in compassion and with a sense of growth, then I can work towards having that skill myself. When it becomes more corrosive, I see them as having something that I don't have, and I believe I can never have that for myself. That comes with quite a fixed belief about, well, I just can't have that if they've got that. I'll never be like that. And my life would be so much better if I could just have that or do that. And so we have all of these beliefs that come up around them. So in this dark arrow, there's of comparing, there's no room for growth and development. The contrary manifestations are where we aren't realistic in our assessments. So, for example, reassuring another, oh, you're just as good as such and such, when clearly they don't have the skills. So it might be tempting for a parent to do that, you know, oh, you can be whatever you want to be, or oh, you can do that as well. Where actually what it might be more useful to do is strip that back a bit and look at how we can develop the skills to be like that. So let's open up the chat, and what's landing and resonating so far for you all in these sort of judgments and comparisons slide? So I'm assuming that means that you're resonating with many of these. With many of these arrows. Which means you're human, so that's one good thing. You're not a robot, you're human, and we can do something about it when we start to resonate. What's coming through here? So constantly judge myself and hold myself in lower esteem than others. Yeah. Celebrating others' successes. Yeah, so that's a really nice growth way of doing it. Dependency on busyness. Yes, that's a good dependency, busyness. I think I'm a bit like that myself, actually. Compare, then despair. Yeah. Yeah. Not very kind to yourself, so you can hear your inner critic. Okay, so thank you for all that sharing. We've just got a few more to go, and then we'll go into some breakout rooms so you can share more with your peers. Expectations. The high expectations of ourselves or others is a major factor in relational issues, both with others and ourselves. Wyom says our present becomes mortgaged to the future. There's that just high expectation that we think if only you could be like that, then life would be okay. Our relationship would be okay, you know, work would be okay. This means that they're suffering in the present. So when we've got these high weighty expectations, we're actually suffering now. And it can be quite a difficult sort of mind leap. It can feel like a bit of a quantum leap at times to really comprehend in those moments that if we can lessen those expectations, actually there'll be less suffering, because the mind has us thinking that if you can meet my expectation, then I'll be okay and calm and well. So it's like a real topsy-turvy way of looking at things. So it can feel like quite an ask for the psyche to accept that, okay, if I lessen the expectation, I might actually feel better within myself. And with expectations, once a goal has been reached, there is usually a new one set. It's essentially unreachable. So it's like this cycle becomes unreachable, because it's not really about that expectation. It's about something's not feeling quite well within themselves. We almost like project it out and create these expectations unconsciously, so we can sort of blame the other person for us not feeling okay within ourselves. And again, it's a real human thing to do. You know, we learn to do this, and it almost like preserves the self. It keeps us a bit protected. So expectations, in a way, serve a really, really good purpose in preserving ourselves and making us feel okay, but they distance ourselves from other people, and they ultimately have us feeling not very happy because they aren't being met. And then the contrary manifestation, which is the polar opposite, is having no expectation on others, which can weaken our boundaries and deepen low self-esteem. So, oh, I don't have any expectations, I'm really laid back, me. That means you might get a bit walked over and trodden on and disrespected. You know, some expectations, a basic level of expectations is pretty important because they're your boundaries. This is how I expect to be treated. And if you can't actually talk to me that way, then, you know, maybe a bit of distance is useful, or that, you know, you're not going to get the best out of me if you talk to me in that way. And so when we're polarizing in this contra manifestation, we might just really let our boundaries be intruded upon. This is quite an interesting one. Needy child syndrome, or we might also call it adaptive child syndrome. So this is where the wounded child within needs to be seen and heard, and often carries these needs out in a demanding way. So it's when we have quite loud emotions, and when we're not heard, we might become a bit louder in some way. We become absorbed by our own needs, not being able to see the needs of others. We have developed needs that are not based on reality and what others are able to give. There's a sense of instant gratification, and usually it's relational. So we need something to be done, and we need it done now. You know, we need to be seen, we need to be understood, and we need it done now. And I think the problem with this arrow is that we don't see the other person as having needs, because we're in a bit of a child state at this time. We sort of almost expect the other person in our life to be the parent to 100% meet that need, where actually they might be tired and have had a hard day at work and be worrying about stuff. So we don't often see that. This can sometimes be a bit tricky to discern where we're like this, because it can look on the slide, it can look very overt. We might think, well, actually, no, I'm not really like that. I care a lot about other people. So we might need to pull back and look at how it plays out in more minor ways in our life. So, for example, walking down the street and you walk past somebody, you know, and they blank you. You know, what happens in those situations? There can be this like rush of internal dialogue, like, what have I done wrong? Or they're rude, or, you know, all of that dialogue that can happen. And in that moment, we can forget to think that actually maybe they're really preoccupied with something. Maybe something really bad has just happened in their life, and they're deep in thoughts. They just didn't see us. When we're in that needy child syndrome, we just don't see other people as having feelings and needs. So it might just be instantaneous, and then we might come back and go, oh, actually, yeah, it's fine now. I know that it's not my fault, and maybe they just didn't see me. But in that moment, we might just go into that needy child. And for some of us, that might last for longer in different situations. So the contra manifestation, and again, this is quite an interesting one. This is the duty locked adult. So where a person over identifies with their responsibility. So play, joy, passion, creativity seeps from their life. So when it's too wounding to feel like a wounded child that really needs some love and support from out there, then what can happen is we go straight into being this, what we call a duty locked adult, where we just become very responsible for others. We take life very, very seriously. We take our role as that more sort of powerful position very, very seriously. And yeah, all the juice of life and all the colour of life can seep out. Let's open up the chat. Feel free to ask any questions at this point, or respond with anything that you're noticing within. Any thoughts on these last two slides? What's the last one? Just remind. Expectations and needy child syndrome. They could be interlinked. There is a little bit of needy child syndrome in most of us, yeah, and we can hold that in compassion and loving kindness as well, so which enables that child to heal. But yeah, there's possibly a little bit, and it will really depend on our upbringing, particularly any attachment or trauma, as to whether that's a bit more present within us. Then it can feel like quite a painful place. that we can hold in some loving kindness. Tracy can see that in members of family. So yeah, it's often quite a loud experience when we can see it in others. Yes, being easy on yourself. So somebody can recognise a duty locked adult easing up on yourself. Yeah, it's just really the self-awareness, picking up that arrow self-awareness is important. But let's come to this last one, self-importance. Again, probably really linking into all the others. So this is where our own needs and most importantly triumphs are put before the triumphs of others. So this is classic in narcissistic traits, and again, we've all got narcissistic traits within us, but where we might want to talk about ourselves a lot and talk about all of the things that we're doing and all of our own triumphs and needs and woes and everything, and they have more importance than the person in front of us. On one extreme, there's it's really incapable of love and empathy. So it's really hard to be empathic to the other person when we're so full of our own needs. And grandiosity projected out, and there's a hollowness within. So this can be the opposite extreme of the needy child as well in adulthood. And the contrary manifestations can be making ourselves heard loudly for the victims we are. So poor me. So we've got on one extreme, we might have just talking about me and everything that I'm doing and all the brilliant stuff I'm doing. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the talking about all my woes and really, really getting somebody to feel sorry for me, which might be the only way I get somebody to see me and to understand me. So there's often a lot of pain beneath this one.